Hi, everybody, and welcome to 20-Minute Tips and Topics with Nicole Walberg, that's me, from Walberg College Counseling, and Dana Ponsky from Dana Ponsky, Your Guide to College. Today's topic is creating a functional learning space at home, and we've got expert guests with us here today. Those guests are Chris Sanderson from Sanderson Test Prep and Ruben Gutierrez from Errez Design Studio. So let me unshare my screen so that you can meet today's guests. All right, so Ruben and Chris, if you'd like to introduce yourselves, and then we'll progress with the slideshow.
Sure, hi, my name is Ruben Gutierrez. I founded Errez Design a little over 10 years ago, and we specialize in a type of design called biographical design, where we kind of take people's stories and biographies and aspirations and all kinds of things and meld it together and create an interior that really reflects who they are and what they're about.
I'm Christopher Sanderson. My company is Sanderson Test Prep, specializing in academic subject tutoring and test prep for standardized tests like SAT, ACT, GRE, GMAT, etc. And we are just approaching our 10-year anniversary and excited to be here and chat about student needs.
That's awesome. We're so glad to have both of you here. As you both know, this past spring was just crazy with people transitioning out of the classroom, bringing their students home, trying to negotiate a living and a learning space all together in one. Perhaps the whole family was together. And so I'm really excited for both of you to share your insight into how to make this fall, because many students are remaining at home for fall, how to make this fall a much more successful and comfortable learning space for everybody in the home. So let's start off with you, Chris. Let me get to your slides.
Absolutely. So what I'm going to reflect on today are a lot of the things that I have noticed over the last few months of tutoring students at home and realizing what kinds of things students really need in a home environment as far as their academic needs and how they can be successful. And then Ruben can reflect on how they can actually create that home environment. But one of the student needs that it seems so intuitive and almost obvious, but nonetheless, I think it's a challenge for people right now, is just some quiet space where they can really focus on their academics. And that's something that is very difficult for students to achieve when they are sharing the space with siblings, with mom or dad or both, everybody working from home. It becomes all of a sudden a space that students are used to having a focused space when they're in school, because the entire classroom, even when they're sharing that space with 20 other students, 30 other students, they all have the same goal in mind. They're all studying the same material at the same time. And so because of that shared focus, it's a little bit easier. If a student is taking a geometry test on Tuesday in third period in person at school, well then guess what? So is everyone else in that classroom. And so it's a lot easier for everybody to be on the same page in terms of what the focus needs are, at that time. When it's at home, finding quiet space where a student can really focus becomes very challenging. And so that's one thing that we want to see if we can maximize. And in order to have that quiet space, a lot of times that's going to go right into the second bullet point of independence. Students really need some independence to be either left alone to focus on their studies or to allow that teacher-student relationship to really foster the education. So many parents recently, you've heard and read parents talk about how much it's been a challenge for them to try to facilitate their students' learning. And yet when the student has an opportunity to be in class with the teacher, even if it's via Zoom, a lot of times the parents are interjecting in that learning experience. And it makes it a little bit more challenging from a teacher perspective. Something that I notice on my end a lot is that it can take the teacher out of his or her focus because the parent is interjecting and they're coming in the room and they're trying to check in and see what's going on. And parent involvement is great, but we want to do it in the right way. So one tip here is try to observe remotely. Get an extra phone, laptop, a tablet, whatever device you can, and you can observe your students learning from afar without having to be right next to them, without having to put yourself on screen or distract your student while they're learning. You can still feel like you can keep tabs on the value of the education that the student is getting and make sure that the student is staying on task. But you can oftentimes do that remotely by using Zoom, Skype, FaceTime. Set up your own connection with your student and put a laptop just off to the side where you're able to still peek in, make sure the student is paying attention, make sure they are logged into the class that they're supposed to be, but also able to give that student the independence that they need to establish that true learning relationship with their instructor and focus on the material that they need to focus on. And you can vary that based on age. So obviously, if you're the parent of a 6-year-old, you're less likely to say, hey, go to your room and go to school for 8 hours and I'm not gonna, check in on you, right? So if you have a 16 or a 17-year-old who's a, sophomore, junior, even senior in high school, they can do things a little bit more independently on their own. You don't have to check in as frequently, or you don't have to establish as close of a watch. But even for your young kids, when it is time for them to actually be on screen in a meeting with their teacher or in a group classroom environment, really give them not only the physical space, but also the mental space to be able to focus on that independently. And you can check in remotely as needed in order to make sure they're on task while still giving them that opportunity to learn. And then the last thing that you see here in this big, bright zigzag box that says enough with the snacks and drinks. It is shocking to me, actually, but in tutoring sessions with students over the course of, these last 4 or 5 months of, COVID online learning, what we have seen with the parents offering the snacks and the drinks, it's a very caring and sweet thing to do. But I would say that with certain families that we work with, we rarely get through an hour tutoring session without mom or dad coming in and saying, hey, do you need something to eat? Do you need something to drink? And I think that the intent is great and it's really caring and nurturing, but set up specific times in your day where you say, hey, this is going to be snack time, or this is going to be lunch, or, here's when you're going to take a break and, have a bite to eat, or, have something to drink. And part of this really comes down to the fact that we all have earbuds now, and you would be surprised, but the loudness of something coming right through the earbuds, it can really take a teacher out of, like I said, his or her ability to focus when you have a student eating that snack and kind of chomping into the microphone, on the earbuds on their end. So as minor of a thing as you might think that it is, it ends up actually being a major distraction in a classroom environment. And it distracts not only other students, but the teacher himself or herself. So really just try to compartmentalize and pick out specific times for the snacks and the drinks instead of interjecting that into learning time. And then if we take a look at the next slide. So establishing a routine is a huge part of student success. And that's really something that I think all of us have faced, adults included. The first little bit of quarantine, it was very easy to be a little bit lackadaisical about the way that we approached our day. But establishing that routine and sticking to it is something that we have really seen foster academic success in students. And so a couple of things that go a long way with that. Try to wake up, shower, and eat. Try to do that at the same time every day. So even if your first class on one day is at 10:30 a.m. and one day it's at 8 a.m., still try to establish a routine where you have that consistent wake up schedule. And whether or not your class starts at a certain time doesn't mean you can't start learning at the same time each day. So really try to establish a school schedule. And even if classes right now are a little all over the place in terms of when they are scheduled, school can include study halls, which means that it can include learning time outside of that classroom schedule. So if your classes are at 10:30 a.m. and 11:45 a.m. and 2 p.m. and that's it for the day, that doesn't mean that you can't stick to a relatively normalized school schedule where you're doing homework or assignments and still learning in those in-between hours to try to keep that kind of 8 till 3 or 8:30 till 3:30 time frame that is a little bit more what students are accustomed to. You'd be surprised how much students will thrive off routine, both personally and academically. And then extracurricular activities, same thing. Try to establish a routine for those. A lot of times right now, because the schedule academically is a little bit in flux, what we see happen with students a lot is that they're trying to incorporate extracurricular activities at these odd times. And a lot of times you'll hear things from parents and students, oh, I can't meet at 11 a.m. tomorrow because I have a tennis lesson at that time, or I'm going to be working in a Zoom meeting with my basketball coach on certain shooting skills at that time. And it's really surprising to me sometimes that it's easy, because the academic schedule is in flux, for people to then deprioritize the academics and try to insert extracurricular activities at times they would never consider under a normal schedule. So try to maintain that normal schedule, both academically and for extracurricular activities and family time as well. So, when the day is done, one nice thing about quarantine and the silver lining and a lot of, the at-home education that we're seeing is that it does open up an opportunity for students to spend a little bit more time and appreciate family. And I definitely want to encourage that. And it's really great to dedicate time for that as well. At the end of the day, I think it's a great opportunity to bring everyone together, and you can really value that time when you've had that chance to give students the space they need, give them the independence they need to learn effectively, set up that separate time for extracurriculars, and then bring everyone back together at the end of the day to enjoy some family time together. And that type of routine is really going to go a long way for allowing everybody to be successful in their new daily routines.
Oh, still learning the Zoom, right? I was muted there. Thank you so much for the helpful information, Chris. Those tips were great. And I know that for me, even, setting a routine in my process is going to be really helpful moving forward. So next, I want to invite Ruben to share his insights with us about how to create that perfect learning space. So Ruben, can you share with us some steps and thoughts that you think families need to consider when designing a learning space?
Sure. Thank you so much. I am really excited to be here because last spring really caught us by a huge surprise. I have a 5-year-old son, and he was in K-5, and we had to just transition to a homeschool without really having a space prepared. And we had just started getting into the rhythm of homework, so he was just kind of doing that at the table. We really didn't have a good system for that either. So homeschool was tough for us because of that. And we learned a lot of lessons, and that's kind of where I based a lot of these tips on. And so the first and most important tip that I would give is to what I call enrolling your student. And this is something that I do with every single one of my clients, and it's part of our process. And it's really being able to visualize what that successful space looks like. And it's going to be different for every student. And letting your student kind of collaborate with you and tell you what it is they need or what they would like in a space. Like if you just even ask questions like, what would the ideal homeschool space look like? Like, what would you have? Would you be looking out a window? Would you be, and just allow yourself to dream for a minute and let your student have a lot of input in that. It could totally transform the way that they even see the whole homeschool situation, rather than being this like horrible task to being this opportunity to really have a really cool, unique learning environment that's specific to your needs. So, and I think that works with students of any age, because it works with my clients of any age. When I enroll them in the vision, then they feel ownership in that. So to me, that would be like the number one most important tip. The second one, this is something I learned from an educator friend of mine, but it's to not just focus on one space. Like when students are in school, they move around, they have different environments, and that helps with like attention span. I'm not really an expert in, the way students behave in school, but I do know that they are moved around, and I personally like to be moved around and be in different environments, and instead of sitting in the same spot for 8 hours. So finding different spaces for different tasks can help you like get into that mood. So like when you're in, working in the kitchen table, maybe that's a place where you do, work that you need to do by hand and you don't need a computer, and then you could be away from that distraction. And when you need to be on the Zoom call, then you can be in the computer station. And when you're reading a book, maybe you can be in a cozier spot. And you have an opportunity to kind of move them around and have maybe even some outdoor spaces involved in it, so you get some outside fresh air time. And that could just make the whole day more exciting. So rather than just think of one space, think of all different kinds of spaces in the house where your student can move around. The third one is what I call the consider the creature comforts. And that's everything from seating, lighting, and your your desk space. So when you're in school, you're probably given one type of seating, and that's uniform with all the students. But at home, you have the opportunity to do a standing desk. You'll have the opportunity to do a ball. Yeah, I know that works really well with my son. He prefers to sit on a ball, and he can bounce, and that helps him concentrate. So like that could be a place where you can get creative and get specific and do an environment, create an environment that really helps your particular student achieve their goals. Lighting's another one that's really important. I didn't realize until like towards the end of last year that my son was working in such a dark spot. And there were lights in the room, but he didn't have a dedicated task light that was helping him for his writing and all those kinds of assignments. So definitely, I would say task lighting is very important, you know, to be able to see. And it seems like an obvious one, but sometimes it's overlooked when we kind of rush through and like, okay, you're going to set your computer up in this corner and let's get going. Like spending time on looking at what these spaces offer and the qualities of it. Lighting is also important as far as natural light. That makes a big difference in the way that a person just interacts throughout the day and is able to show up. So, you know, it's even like with people working in an office, if they have natural light, they end up being more productive. They will claim to be happier. The same thing is happening with your students. So finding a spot where there's natural light would be really important. And a sturdy desk. I have seen some students, I won't mention any names, but their desks are like really shaky, you know, and they're not very sturdy, and that's very distracting. So like some kind of sturdy desk, this is maybe a place where you may want to invest in something that's going to last for throughout their student career, and something that's going to really just be supportive, sturdy, have storage, have their pencils where they need it, have their pens and all the tools that they're going to need accessible. That's really important. My next tip would be to get organized. So many times my son's teacher would say, you need a piece of paper, and he was like fumbling, like, where's the paper? I don't know, it used to be here, now it's over there, like, where do we keep the paper? Like, okay, so like know what you're going to need and have a spot for it. And one tip I like for organization, and I learned this from a professional organizer, is one-step organization, where it's you do one move to put it away and one move to take it out. So if it's like you put your papers in a box, in a folder, in a box, in a cabinet, that's like 4 steps. That's not going to go back, you know. So if it's one step where it's a bin or it's some kind of open shelf system that has everything organized, you're more likely to use the item and you're more likely to put it away when you're done. Keeping it organized is so helpful, not just a big mess of stuff all over the place. And then my last and most fun tip, this is the artsy part, is to get artsy and decorate. So this is a chance where your student doesn't just have to be in a classroom that the teacher just decides what it looks like. Here they can kind of decide what it looks like. They're missing out on a lot of that interaction with their friends, and so maybe there's a way to incorporate pictures of their friends or things that reminds them of community so they feel connected to that, and let them choose the theme, the colors, the different things that go around them, the artwork. I'm not the best example of a Zoom background, but if they're going to be showing up for their teacher and for the rest of their classmates, have them have a Zoom background that they're happy with, that they feel represents who they are and represents their personality. And it's not just like some random corner of the house. So like these are things that can help excite your student and get them pumped up to have a really great school year.
I love those tips, Ruben. And when you say like invest in a desk and the shaky desk thing, that has been so key to me with my workspace, because writing and shaking the table, I know that sounds silly that I would have such a flimsy writing space or surface, but that's extremely distracting, or typing and having things shake.
Yeah.
And I brought in task lighting because I also noticed that I was missing some task lighting. Golly, yeah, you hit on a lot of things that even I've noticed just in my transition to working more in my office space as opposed to out and about.
Totally. Yeah. And a lot of them are obvious and some of them are not so obvious. And when you kind of go through the list, then you can ensure like, okay, I'm checking all my boxes. I'm making sure I'm putting my best foot forward and giving them the best shot at this. This is a difficult transition for them. So making it as like fun and exciting as possible, I think is just going to enroll them into like, okay, this could be a really great school year.
Absolutely.
And not just like a bummer school year.
Yeah.
So Ruben, I have a quick question. So
Sure.
obviously I'm based in New York where apartments are very different than houses. And so my question is, one of the biggest issues that you'll hear from families, and I've been spending a lot of time trying to learn about this, so many people are homeschooling their students in the future. They're not even going to be part of necessarily a school environment, like a typical school environment, or they're doing this pod learning where they're going to be allowing other students into their home. But a lot of people here are living in an apartment, which is a very small space where oftentimes you might have two students sharing a room, or there's just a very limited number of areas for a student to be able to learn in. So how do you make recommendations to a family who might have a limited space in their home? Maybe it's, it's a 2-bedroom house and there's 4 people living in there, but how can you go ahead to be, for students that are doing, virtual learning or hybrid learning or homeschooling, where they're going to have all of these parts that are uniquely individual for each student, but in a small space? Like, how can you come up with creative ideas to make that work?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very common problem, and I have it here too in Miami with a lot of people moving into condos and asking me the same question. There's a lot of interesting multiple functional furniture pieces that can be used that transition. Like even in this little picture here, there's a loft bed that has a workstation underneath. So that's like the same footprint is now serving 2 functions. And I would say, like, when you think of it as like a dedicated space, it's not like that is only for that student and that's it. It could be something where you put all their tools on a tray, it gets stowed away in a closet, and then it gets pulled out and the dining room table becomes that dedicated space for those hours of the day. And then it transitions. So I would just say get creative with it, and but also considering all the other functions as well. And if you are going to make the commitment and the dedication to say that your student will be homeschooled, especially for a long period of time, then it's worth it to go in and make those priorities in your home. And so it might mean sacrificing some other space or maybe scaling back. And I know that if I tell somebody in New York City to scale back on closet space or something, they're like, well, I mean, I had 2 feet of closet space to begin with. Like, that's ridiculous. Right. But yeah, you'd have to see your individual situation, and there's so many creative furniture things that can allow you to have the multiple function.
Yeah, I know in my family, we're looking at how to make our dining room table function as a desk. And so it actually has functions for 2 people to do workspace, but also maybe to remove a barrier so that way we can have people eat at our dining room table. So there's a lot of modular furniture Google searches that go on in this household to try to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, one thing I found, like I had that's funny you mentioned the dining room table becomes like the popular hotspot for a homeschool. And so I actually work in, it's not a dining room table, it's like an office table, but my whole office kind of works off of one big table. It's a big long table, but what we did was we bought a divider on Amazon, and it just clips to the side so that I have like a little bit of a wall, it's maybe 1.5 feet, and it just allows me to like just have my own little space so that I'm not like just spilling over or being distracted by what my coworkers are doing. And so that's a solution, and it just unclips if you're gonna have dinner. Okay. So that might be too cumbersome for some, but it might also be helpful if you're dividing the table into 4 workstations.
And Dana, if I could chime in on that academically, one thing that, so we have a questionnaire that we sent out to students about what a lot of their challenges were in learning from home and having to share the space. And one thing that I thought was really interesting, that if the space has to be shared, and if you don't have an opportunity to, establish the kind of space that you need and the quiet that you need to get away and focus, a lot of times maximizing focus can happen through scheduling. And one thing that I thought was really interesting in this questionnaire that we filled out is that students said that they were much more distracted by their siblings and parents when they were doing activities that required themselves to be quiet than activities that required them to talk. So, and same thing for parents. If you know that you're both going to be on a call, if you're both on a call kind of at the same time, it's a little less likely that you're distracted by the other person's talking in the background when you're also talking. It sort of rings in a little bit less intrusively, in that situation. However, for a student, if you're trying to do something that takes quiet focus and you're trying to read and memorize information for a test that you have the next day, or you're trying to listen to someone else where you're really, like you have to be quiet on your end. It's not an interactive, engagement, but it's something where you're just quietly listening. For students almost across the board said that that was the one situation where they didn't want background noise. So some of that could potentially be done, through, getting together as a family and scheduling, okay, if we need to be talking and interacting, and if we have the flexibility, then here are the times of day where we're going to prioritize those activities. And here are the times of day where we're all going to prioritize the things that we can do for school or for work that are quiet. And, if I'm sitting here answering emails and my son or daughter is studying for a test, everybody can do that effectively at the same time. And then maybe, set up those interactive times to be, happening together. So that's one thing that I found very interesting from that questionnaire, that sometimes can potentially help solve, a seemingly unsolvable problem, if you don't have, the space. But like Ruben said, a lot of times, even in tight space with the right kinds of furniture solutions and the right kind of foresight and creativity, I think that you probably can make that space, as beneficial to everyone, as it can be.
I love that insight, Chris. It's like thinking about mental space and also physical space, because those are both, you're obviously sitting in a chair, that's a physical space, and if you're uncomfortable, you can't concentrate. But I really appreciate that insight about thinking about the distractions that come in when you're co-working. Great point. Well, any other thoughts, any questions, last minute things you'd like to add into the presentation? I went ahead and I clicked to the takeaway slide just to sum up what we talked about today. So study needs, really thinking about getting space, dedicating space, both that mental space and that physical space for the student or for the worker. Creating a routine is really important, as Chris said. And then of course the design needs, enrolling the student, dedicating some space, integrating creature comforts, organization. That one-step organization that Ruben brought up, really important, reach in that drawer, grab it. That way you're not rustling around, make it easily accessible. And lastly, make it fun, get artsy with it. So thank you so much, you guys. We really loved having you on today, and hopefully we can have you back to talk about more design ideas related to studying and just being your best student. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Nicole Walberg with Walberg College Counseling. You can find my contact information on this slide. And as always, I'm with Dana Ponsky.
And you can find me at consultwithdana.com, and my contact info is there. And then we'll also share Ruben and Chris's information as well on our YouTube channel, Facebook, Instagram, pretty much everywhere you could possibly find us. You'll have their information as well. And we're really happy to be able to do this. And thank you, gentlemen, for your time today. It was really helpful. I think this is going to be a lot of people on every walk of life is going to find this to be really useful. So thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Yep.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Oh, one last shout out. Ruben did put together a really great blog post about this exact topic. So we'll also include that in the footnotes in all of our posts about this video. And Chris Sanderson's contact information and test prep resources as well. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.